Billy's voice trembled as he admitted, "He didn't listen to my warning." Those words carried a pain that couldn't be hidden. When he finally spoke publicly about the devastating loss of Rob and Michelle, it became clear this wasn't just grief. It was guilt, shock, and the kind of anguish that comes from knowing something you couldn't prevent.
I think, one of the things I think is interesting about this case is that a lot of American families suffer from addiction. It used to be a lot more stigmatized than it was, in the sense that people really thought it was like a moral failing. And here you see, the son of an extremely famous, wealthy person who by all accounts was like a very dedicated father, and his wife, a very dedicated mother, doing everything they could for this kid. And then even into adulthood to save him in some way from addiction. And as so many American families have experienced, like sometimes that demon is the hardest one to battle.
The Brentwood home that
once overflowed with laughter and warmth had turned into a place of unbearable silence. For decades, it had been a sanctuary for love, music, and friendship. But beneath that happiness, there were struggles and fears that Rob had kept buried deep inside. Billy's decision to open up revealed the emotional weight Rob carried quietly for years. The pressure, the sleepless nights, and the worries he never dared to share. According to private recollections shared with trusted reporters, the truth behind their friendship ran far deeper than the world ever realized. That crucial meeting unfolded on a quiet Sunday afternoon, November 30th, 2025, a moment that would later haunt Billy Crystal forever. Just 2 weeks before the heartbreaking event, Billy drove to Rob Reiner's home in Brentwood a little after 400 p.m., following a short but serious call from Rob himself. Rob's tone on the phone had been stripped of his usual warmth. He said just one thing: "I need to talk to you for a bit. It's not about movies." That was it. No jokes, no laughter. And Billy instantly knew something wasn't right. The second the front door opened, that feeling only deepened.
During the party, he was approaching people there, asking questions that, in that context, seemed confrontational, strange. Especially, "Are you famous?" Asking people there, "Are you famous?"
Rob looked nothing like his usual self, tired, unshaven, and weighed down. His shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled too high, and his hair was out of place. When they shook hands, Billy noticed Rob's grip felt weak, drained of its old spark, as if something heavy was pressing down on him. Inside, the silence was thick. Rob didn't turn on the TV or play any music like he always did. Instead, he quietly poured 2 glasses of water, setting one on the table, but never touched it once. His eyes kept flicking toward the dark hallway, leading deeper into the house, and that small repeated glance made Billy uneasy. Rob finally spoke, his voice and distant. "Things in my family are a mess right now," he said slowly. "I haven't told anyone, but I'm truly exhausted." It was then that Billy realized this wasn't just stress. Rob was carrying something far heavier than he could admit. When Billy asked what was really going on, Rob didn't hold back. He opened up about his son, Nick. He said Nick had suffered a serious relapse earlier that month. And since then, his behavior had completely changed. He had become short-tempered, snapping over small things, and some nights his mood swung so sharply that Michelle would quietly leave the room to avoid another argument. Rob described one specific night just before Thanksgiving. A tense confrontation in the kitchen that started over money and Nick's treatment. He didn't repeat the full argument, but Billy said Rob's face changed as he spoke. That night had shaken him. It was the first time Rob admitted he felt something deeper than worry, something that truly frightened him. Then Rob fell silent. He rubbed his forehead and stared at the floor, lost in thought.
So you can imagine a party of actual famous people, right, and fame-adjacent people who are really used to strange behavior out in public, but here they are at a gathering of their peers, right, at a party hosted by Conan. It was unsettling to see. So Bill Hader was one of the people he approached at the party.
Billy said it wasn't anger he saw. It was exhaustion. The kind that lives inside someone who's been fighting the same battle for too long. Rob confessed he was trying to keep Nick close, hoping that staying within the family support might help him recover. Then he said something that would stay with Billy Crystal for years. "I'm just afraid that if I ever push the boy away, I'll be the one who breaks him." The words came out slow and shaky, like Rob was half speaking to himself. Billy noticed Rob kept clasping his hands tightly, fingers interlocked as if holding himself together. That's when Billy decided to be firm. He leaned forward, looked his friend in the eye, and told him the truth. That his love as a father was admirable. But the situation had reached a point where safety, his and Michelle's, couldn't be ignored anymore. Boundaries had to be set, even if it hurt to do it. Rob didn't interrupt. He just sat there, eyes rimmed red, quietly listening. Then, in a weary tone, he said, "I understand what you're saying. I'm worried, too, but I can't see my son as a danger." He explained that Nick had already faced too much pain in his life, and he feared that one wrong decision, one sign of rejection, could send him spiraling again. As he spoke, Rob leaned back, sighing deeply like a man unsure of anything anymore. When the talk ended, he walked toward the window, staring into the backyard, the same place where he and Michelle had once hosted joyful, laughter-filled nights. Then he turned, gently placed a hand on Billy's shoulder, and said he'd think about everything they discussed.
It was an awkward exchange, made more awkward by the fact that he had met Hader earlier in the night. Rob had introduced him. So when he came up and asked him questions such as, "What's your name? Are you famous?" It was unsettling and described as scary from Hader's perspective.
Billy left as evening fell over Brentwood. But that conversation wouldn't leave him. It replayed in his head, that same uneasy feeling tightening in his chest every time. It was one of the few times he walked out of Rob's home with a single thought echoing in his mind that something was deeply wrong and he couldn't shake it. Something truly unsettling had been building beneath the surface. Slow, silent, and invisible to the outside world. Only after Billy's recollections came to light did people begin re-examining what really went on inside the Reiner home. Suddenly, everything looked different, like the warning signs had always been there, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be understood too late. Billy admitted that when he first heard what happened, his reaction was disbelief. "This doesn't sound like the Rob I knew," he said softly. What disturbed him most wasn't only how severe the situation was, but how it unfolded. The strange series of moments leading up to it. The Reiner home had never been a quiet place. It was full of laughter, music, and movement. Friends dropping by, calls being answered, the rhythm of a life well lived. But that week, everything went eerily still. It wasn't until someone arrived for a scheduled visit, knocking on the door again and again with no reply, that the silence finally broke. And what they discovered inside changed everything. For Billy Crystal, that detail wouldn't leave his mind. How could hours pass in that house once so full of life without anyone realizing something was terribly wrong? He later learned how the heartbreaking discovery unfolded. When Romy entered, she saw her father first and ran out in shock. Michelle was found.
So think about it, Glenn. It wasn't just this guy Hader, but apparently Nick was going up to all these famous people, if you listen to the longer interview, all these famous people at Conan O'Brien's house. And he was making the point, the reporter there, that in a room full of famous people at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party, it's very strange to keep asking people, "Are you famous?"
Elsewhere in the home, and that fact haunted Billy deeply. It meant Rob and Michelle hadn't been together in those final moments, and that thought shattered him. Billy remembered how Rob once said the tension inside the house didn't erupt all at once. It spread slowly, room by room, like a shadow taking over the light. And the way things were found inside seemed to reflect that same description, painfully, eerily accurate. What also stayed with Billy was the long gap before help arrived. Rob was always quick to act, always protective. The idea that his home could stay so silent for so long didn't make sense to him. It brought back something Rob had once confessed, that sometimes the quiet inside their house felt frighteningly heavy. Billy later admitted he couldn't explain what happened from an investigator's view. He wasn't trained for that, but he could feel the weight of it. From what Rob had shared, it seemed the tragedy didn't come from one moment of chaos, but from years of emotional strain building up until it finally broke through. Billy believed it was the kind of pressure that grows quietly over time until it explodes all at once. He said the entire situation mirrored what Rob had described weeks earlier. Those moments when Nick completely lost control, when things escalated faster than anyone could stop. What convinced Billy even more that something was deeply wrong was what he later heard about the condition of the home. It was strangely undisturbed. Furniture in place, everything neat. Nothing showing forced entry or outside intrusion. To Billy, that meant one thing. Whatever happened came from inside, not out. He had spent countless evenings in that home and knew its warmth, its rhythm. The fact that everything still looked normal made it even harder to process. This heartbreak hadn't struck from the outside world. It had unfolded in an ordinary moment inside a space once filled with laughter and love. He couldn't shake the image of Romy's reaction either, running out in such panic that she couldn't step back inside. To Billy, that spoke volumes. Whatever she witnessed had to be something no loved one could ever prepare for. When he later read the reports, that same wave of disbelief hit him again, as if a piece of his own world had shattered beyond repair. But one detail troubled him most: Nick's absence. Nick wasn't there when the home was found, and Billy couldn't ignore what that meant. He didn't jump to conclusions, but his mind flashed back to that afternoon in Brentwood when Rob confessed he no longer knew how to manage his son's unpredictable behavior. Nick's absence felt like a missing puzzle piece, the one that made all of Rob's past worries echo louder than ever before. When Billy connected the dots, he began to believe this wasn't just a random tragedy. It was the heartbreaking end to a build-up no one could stop in time. From that moment, the story started shifting. Nick's name faded from headlines and appeared only in Rob's private words shared among close friends. While the public tried to piece together what happened, Billy couldn't stop asking himself one haunting question. Not what happened, but who had been missing before everything went wrong. When Billy learned that Nick Reiner wasn't there, his heart sank. Nick wasn't a stranger to him. He had known him since he was a child. Born in 1993, Nick had always carried both Rob's deepest love and greatest worry. For years, Rob had confided in Billy about Nick's struggles, battles with addiction, recovery attempts, and painful relapses that strained the family beyond words. Billy recalled Rob once telling him how Nick had vanished for months, cutting off contact completely, leaving everyone terrified, but still hopeful he'd come home. So, when Billy found out Nick was missing that day, all of Rob's past fears came rushing back. It was exactly what Rob had dreaded, that one unpredictable moment when everything might fall apart. Then came another disturbing piece. Something reportedly happening just hours before the tragedy. According to whispers in entertainment circles, Nick and Rob had an intense argument at a Christmas gathering hosted by Conan O'Brien the night before. Witnesses said Nick's mood was erratic, his energy uneasy, and the exchange drew unwanted attention. That story shook Billy to his core because it matched what Rob had told him. How quickly things could spiral when emotions ran high. Not long after, everything changed. On December 14th, 2025, shocking news hit the industry. Authorities announced that Nick Reiner was being charged in connection with what had happened at the Brentwood home. He faced 2 serious charges related to the loss of his parents, with additional factors tied to the case. Billy learned that Nick had left Brentwood before the discovery, later being located near the University of Southern California, more than 20 kilometers away. That distance spoke volumes to Billy. It fit exactly what Rob had described. How Nick sometimes ran when his emotions spun out of control, acting on panic instead of thought. When court photos appeared showing Nick restrained and wearing a prison uniform, Billy said it broke him completely. Every warning he'd ever given Rob now felt tragically real. Nick is currently being held without bail as he awaits his next court hearing in early 2026. Legal insiders told Billy that investigators believed the situation was rooted in long-standing family tensions, especially during the final 24 hours before things went terribly wrong. Though Billy wasn't directly involved in the investigation, those insights only strengthened his belief. This wasn't an outside act. It was something that had been growing inside that family for years, built from love, exhaustion, and despair colliding all at once. And what shattered Billy most was knowing that Nick, the son Rob had devoted his entire heart to, had become the very center of the heartbreak Rob feared would one day destroy him. Being Charlie hadn't been just another movie for Rob Reiner. It was his emotional plea to save his son. Billy said Rob truly believed that film could change Nick's life, bring hope, and rebuild their bond. But over time, the same deep struggles never really disappeared. So when Billy saw Nick being led into court, it felt like watching the collapse of all the hope Rob had held onto for years. Privately, Billy confessed he had feared this outcome deep down. Not because he wanted to, but because every sign had been there. Rob's late-night confessions, the Christmas party argument, Nick's unexplained absence, and then the devastating arrest miles from home. It all formed a tragic pattern that could no longer be ignored. As the investigation moved into formal court proceedings, Billy knew there was no escaping the truth anymore. The story had entered a painful new chapter, one where love, loyalty, and friendship could no longer shield reality. Friends in Beverly Hills said Billy slowly withdrew from public life. He skipped dinners, stayed away from gatherings, and spent quiet evenings driving through Brentwood before returning home in silence. Those close to him said he looked like a man haunted by memories too heavy to carry. For Billy, losing Rob wasn't just losing a friend. It was losing a piece of his own soul. Rob had been the first call when life was good and the comfort when it wasn't. What made it unbearable was knowing that it all ended without Billy by his side. People close to him said he kept replaying that last visit. Rob's weary eyes, his trembling voice, and the stillness that filled the room. Billy told friends he'd felt something was off, but convinced himself Rob could handle it. That belief became the scar he could never heal. Billy began blaming himself for leaving too soon, for not insisting on one more visit, for not pushing harder when he saw the signs. Some close friends said he went back through old texts and call logs, reading every small message and joke they'd ever shared. One friend revealed Billy once said quietly, "I thought I still had plenty of time. I was wrong." Those words became his private confession. Not anger, but pure regret. His pain turned inward. He wasn't upset with Rob or anyone else. He was angry at himself. He felt he had been too gentle, too trusting. That love alone could keep everything from falling apart. That anger didn't burst out. It stayed buried, keeping him awake for endless nights. Friends said he'd rise before dawn, pacing the house or sitting by the window in silence, lost in thoughts he couldn't escape. The hardest realization for Billy came when he understood that the nightmare he and Rob once feared had come true, exactly as they'd both worried it might. That truth left him trapped between two unbearable feelings, knowing he had seen it coming and knowing he couldn't stop it. To him, that helplessness cut deeper than the loss itself. He hadn't just lost a friend, he'd lost the chance to save him when it mattered most. People inside the entertainment world said Billy Crystal quietly stepped away from the spotlight for months. Talk shows, tributes, and interviews reached out, but he kept declining. One close friend said Billy simply couldn't speak about Rob without breaking down. Every time Rob's name came up, it reopened the same wound. The guilt of not being there, the pain of realizing how quickly everything slipped away. In that fragile emotional space, Billy started looking back, not to find excuses, but to remember the light that defined their friendship. He wanted to hold on to the laughter, the joy, the years of connection that came before tragedy took over. Slowly, the story shifted from heartbreak to something more tender. A deep lifelong bond between two men who had shared nearly 50 years of loyalty, creativity, and love for their craft. When Billy finally decided to speak publicly, he didn't do it on camera or in a big televised tribute. Instead, he joined his wife Janice and Rob Reiner's closest circle of lifelong friends, Albert Brooks, Martin Short, Larry David, Mark Shawman, Barry Levinson, and others who had built Hollywood alongside them. Together, they released a heartfelt statement through the Associated Press. A farewell filled with dignity, respect, and emotion, honoring both Rob and Michelle Reiner. For Billy, that statement meant everything. It wasn't just a message. It was a love letter to a friendship that had defined his life. The statement captured the core of what united them from the beginning, a shared love for storytelling, the kind that makes strangers laugh and cry together in dark theaters. That was Rob's world. And Billy had walked beside him through it all. Their friendship began back in the mid-1970s on the set of All in the Family. Rob was already a star while Billy was still hustling for his big break. Yet, from their first talk, something clicked. They saw life through the same lens: humor, honesty, and heart. It was never about fame. It was about connection. What started as quick chats between takes grew into an unbreakable friendship. They became creative partners who trusted each other fully. When Rob began directing, that bond only grew stronger. Billy became more than a performer. He was Rob's sounding board, a collaborator who helped fine-tune jokes, scenes, and emotions. It was a friendship built not just on shared success, but on deep mutual respect. The kind of bond that lasts a lifetime. In the months after the tragedy, Billy's world seemed to shrink. Hollywood's laughter and bright lights felt dim without Rob beside him. Invitations poured in, but he stayed quiet. Even when he did speak, friends noticed the weight in his voice. Grief mixed with memories too heavy to put into words. The pain wasn't only about losing a friend. It was about losing a piece of his past, a piece of himself. He tried to return to routine, morning walks, breakfast with Janice, calls with old friends, but nothing felt the same. Every sound, every familiar face reminded him of Rob. Hearing a single line from When Harry Met Sally could stop him in his tracks. The laughter that once filled him with joy now carried sorrow. It was a reminder of a world that existed no more. Behind closed doors, Billy spent nights surrounded by memories, photos, old scripts, and handwritten notes from their decades together. There were snapshots from The Princess Bride, A Few Good Men, This Is Spinal Tap, and of course, When Harry Met Sally. Each one captured two men who had built something magical together. Friends said Billy's home slowly turned into a quiet museum of moments, every corner holding a piece of Rob's memory. He didn't like people to see how deeply the loss affected him, but those closest to him knew. Some nights he'd reread Rob's old notes, whispering that what once made him laugh now made him cry. Their friendship had become part of him, something no time could erase. As Hollywood moved forward with new shows and award seasons, Billy started thinking about how to protect Rob's legacy. He didn't want the world to remember Rob Reiner only for tragedy. He wanted them to remember the man, the artist, the father, the storyteller whose work touched millions. Quietly, he began working on a tribute project dedicated to Rob's life and career. He reached out to Rob's longtime collaborators, writers, directors, and actors who had shared those creative moments with him. The goal wasn't another documentary for fame or headlines. It was something more meaningful, a living tribute filled with voices, memories, and love. Billy's vision was simple: to remind the world that behind the fame, Rob Reiner was a man who believed in kindness, in connection, and in the power of storytelling to heal hearts and bring people together. During the early stages of the tribute, Billy revisited old interviews and behind-the-scenes clips, hearing Rob's voice again for the first time in months, and it completely broke him. Friends said he sat there, headphones on, silent tears streaming down his face. He told Janice that it felt like being in the same room with Rob again, hearing him laugh, direct, joke, and breathe life into the world he loved. For a fleeting moment, it felt like nothing had changed. Soon, the tribute project began to grow beyond Billy's imagination. Nearly everyone who had ever worked with Rob wanted to be part of it. Meg Ryan, Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, Sally Field, and so many others came forward to share memories that captured the real Rob. Not just the filmmaker, but the human being behind the lens. Their stories built a portrait of a man who was kind, hilarious, and deeply compassionate. Every word reminded Billy that Rob's legacy wasn't defined by how his story ended, but by how brightly he had lived. Even as he poured himself into the project, Billy still wrestled with guilt. He often spoke about that final conversation, the moment when Rob's exhaustion was clear, yet his love for his family still burned strong. Billy told a close friend, "If I could live that day again, I'd never leave. I'd make him rest. I thought love would be enough." That single thought became the wound that refused to heal. In time, he realized that healing couldn't come from self-blame. It would come from honoring the friendship that had defined his life. Slowly, Billy began appearing again, quietly and humbly at small gatherings honoring Rob's legacy. Each event brought both tears and gratitude. At one emotional tribute in Los Angeles, Billy spoke softly but firmly. Rob believed in people. He believed that, even in the darkest stories, there was always a reason to laugh, to love, and to try again. The audience rose to their feet in applause, many wiping away tears. It wasn't just a speech. It was peace, finally finding its place in Billy's heart. Privately, friends noticed subtle changes. Billy started smiling again. The laughter that had vanished from his home began to echo faintly once more. He returned to writing, performing, and creating. But there was something new in his tone: wisdom, gentleness, reflection. It wasn't the old Billy Crystal chasing the next laugh. It was a man who understood how fragile and precious life really is. By early 2026, the tribute project had evolved into something monumental. Major studios stepped in to help distribute it, and Hollywood came together in a rare show of unity to honor Rob Reiner's legacy. At the premiere, Billy walked the red carpet alone in a simple black suit, his eyes shining under the lights. He didn't pose for cameras or give interviews. He just stood there quietly, waiting for the lights to dim. When Rob's voice filled the theater once more, Billy wiped away a tear and smiled softly. After the film ended, Billy stayed in his seat as the credits rolled. Then came one simple line written by Billy himself. "For Rob, you taught the world how to laugh, love, and believe in people." That night, as he stepped outside into the cool Los Angeles air, something inside Billy finally settled. The grief was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He understood that though nothing could replace the decades they had shared, Rob's presence would never fade. Every laugh in a crowded theater, every touching movie moment, they all carried Rob's spirit forward. In the end, Billy Crystal didn't find peace by forgetting. He found it by remembering. Remembering the friend who showed him that stories can heal, that love can outlast pain, and that true friendship never ends. When Harry Met Sally remains living proof of their incredible bond. The film wasn't just a Hollywood classic. It was what happens when two creative souls trust each other completely. Billy often told friends that Rob was one of the few directors who made him feel totally free as an artist while still being gently guided. Their connection was built on collaboration, not ego, and that's what made it magic. In the statement to the Associated Press, Billy and Rob's closest friends described Rob as a master storyteller, someone who could shift effortlessly between laughter and tears, comedy and drama, fiction and truth. Those weren't empty praises. They came from people who had shared decades of creative triumphs and challenges with him. Everyone who worked with Rob knew how deeply he cared about his team. Actors, writers, editors, every person on set. He never made anyone feel small. He made them feel part of something bigger. For Billy, writing those words was both healing and heartbreaking. Because this time, he had to speak of Rob in the past tense. Rob wasn't just a collaborator. He was family. Billy had spent countless nights at the Reiners' home in Brentwood, sharing dinners filled with laughter and long talks about family, America, and the purpose of art. Those moments now lived only in memory. Memories made bittersweet by the knowledge of what later happened in that same home. It tore through Billy's heart like nothing else. The tribute also celebrated Rob and Michelle's marriage, a union rooted in loyalty, humor, and unwavering love. Billy admired how Michelle had always been Rob's anchor, his partner, his balance, his compass. Losing them both, he said, felt like losing part of his own story. In the final lines of their joint tribute, Billy and his friends quoted, "It's a wonderful life." One of Rob's favorite films, reminding the world that one person's impact can ripple endlessly through others, and when they're gone, that emptiness can never truly be measured. Billy understood that more than anyone. The emptiness wasn't just about Hollywood. It was about every unreturned call, every unfinished joke, every silence that used to be filled with laughter. Their 50-year friendship wasn't just history. It was proof that real connection still exists in an industry built on illusion. When Billy finally spoke, it wasn't just to mourn. It was to protect his friend's legacy. To make sure Reiner would forever be remembered for who he truly was, a storyteller who made the world warmer, wiser, and more human. The loss of Rob and Michelle Reiner sent ripples far beyond Hollywood. It wasn't just another headline. It was the heartbreaking end of a friendship that had helped define modern cinema. Behind the fame and the flashing cameras lay something raw and real. Love, regret, and the eternal question of whether anyone could have stopped what was coming. Billy's journey through grief became a quiet lesson to everyone watching. That even in moments of brilliance, there can be unseen shadows. And maybe that's what makes stories like theirs so powerful. They remind us that behind every smile, every success, there's a fragile heart doing its best to hold on. So now it's your turn. What do you think? Could this heartbreaking story have been prevented, or had it been spiraling for too long? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. See you in the next one.